Sweet. Well, congratulations on getting out of bed before noon. So sweet, guys.
A little hungover.
Yeah. If anyone had those blue drinks at the friends party, congratulations again on being here. So sweet. I'm very happy to be joined by a lot of really awesome guys pushing forward the Web3 gaming space. Most of these people I've worked with previously go back to the last year plus. So we're going to ask some super hard-hitting questions on the perspective of VCs investing in GameFi. I hope a bunch of alpha comes out of this. But without further ado, would love to just start with a brief round of intros, keeping it to a minute or less.
Yeah, hi everybody. Apologies if I sound a little lethargic. Last night was rough. I'm Brian Johnson. I'm a partner at Republic Capital. I co-manage the crypto investing side of our firm, but we're not just a crypto VC. We also do aerospace and defense, which I know is interesting. But yeah, that's us.
Hi, I'm Tommy, co-founder at Merit Circle, and a managing partner at Flow Ventures, is a venture fund.
Hi everyone, I'm the co-founder of Raremind, which is a fantasy chess application. I'm a former professional chess player, so I'm here the guy pitching you.
Hey guys, I'm Tekin Salimi. I'm the founder of DAO5. We're a seed stage crypto venture firm. We invest in all categories in the space, gaming included. And before starting DAO5 last year, I was a general partner at Polychain Capital. We were one of the first and biggest investors in Avalanche, so very excited to support this ecosystem.
Sweet. And the theme is the VC perspective of investing in GameFi. And GameFi is a huge vertical within crypto, and I think it makes sense if we just start by asking the panelists, like, what makes you bullish on gaming as a vertical within crypto? Like, how do you get up in the morning and see like the future of Web3 gaming and that being like competitive versus Web 2 gaming in the long run?
I can go first. I think I would almost say like I cannot see a future without Web3 for gaming. So I think it's almost like a moot question. Like you couldn't imagine now playing a game without a backend, or you will hardly play one. I think it's the same for games without Web3 elements. Like it's just very subtle things that will become standard, mostly around ownership. And I think if you don't have that, you will just be competed away by games with Web3 elements. So I think the question is probably obsolete in 5 years. Like most games will have Web3 elements.
I totally agree on that angle. I mean, in a nutshell, the Web3 side of gaming is just a fiat off-ramp. I get frustrated now with all the games that I have and the assets that I have. I'm like, wait, it's worth how much? But at the end of the day, places like Steam or Epic, you're locked in that ecosystem because they worry about KYC, they worry about AML, and crypto allows them to extract away that. And so putting things on chain, allowing you to basically put the bear on the user, for the AML, KYC, taxes and all that stuff. It just makes it super easy, and they don't have to worry about it. And all these companies, I think I agree, with you on that side, where they're all going to branch into Web3 and just the basic, fiat off-ramp side. Like you actually own your assets, and maybe they're interoperable, maybe there's other aspects like data on chain and stuff like that. But at the base layer, just simple fiat off-ramp, I think, is the way everything's going.
Yeah, to Brian's point, I think like my first principles when I think of Web3 gaming is focusing on what's not working today with Web 2 gaming. And if you look at the gaming space as just markets, they're very much monopolies controlled by the publishers. And I think as a user, especially in like social games or MMORPGs, you create the vast majority of the value through these network effects, and you capture relatively little. So I think looking at games as marketplaces, Web3 has the potential to make these a little more egalitarian, a little more fair in terms of the value you create and the value you earn as a user specifically. And then there's the whole IP element, which I think is very interesting. Mods are incredibly popular. I think they're valuable. It's a useful act to create a mod of a popular game for a community. But often these are like against terms of service. There's potential IP infringement. And then in the case that the mod becomes incredibly popular, as the creator, you often don't capture any value for that. So I think all of the elements around IP ownership, around asset value in the Web3 environment is more conducive of the next generation of games and kind of sharing that value across multiple parties in the ecosystem.
Then a follow-up to that, based on what a couple of you said, I mean, how do you think the Web2 gaming giants, like how quickly do you think they respond to like the new Web3 native business models? Because in my mind, it sounds a bit cannibalistic, to how they're currently making money. So I'm very curious how you think and when you think they will adapt or evolve.
I can speak something about that. As for chess, right, you have the biggest chess platform called chess.com. They have 100 million users. And obviously, they cannot ignore the fact that Web3 users now are coming and you own your items. And actually, on chess.com, you have to pay to play, right? On Web3, the guys, you are going to get paid to play. So they cannot ignore the fact that it's coming. And they are positioning themselves. They are asking the right questions. Actually, they are trying to onboard as well the world champion, saying, hey, we cannot let this parallel industry take over our market. So they have to ask themselves the right questions. But then they have to switch the whole business model, which is not easy for such a big platform. But at least in what I see, they are moving slowly toward that. But then they have to reshuffle a bit. Their infrastructure, business model, and so on.
I would say they're moving very fast now. It was a point where you were wondering when they were going to start, and then all of a sudden it was just like, right up a mountain, just shooting up. You have Japan. There's another layer 1 based in Japan called Oasis, which, full disclosure, we invested in. You basically have a bunch of the Japanese and Korean conglomerates signing up to be, validators of that chain and to put their IP on that chain as well. Because at the end of the day, all these huge conglomerates were concerned about control of IP and user experience. They see a lot of these, assets being stolen. So if they have their own, say, roll-up or their own subnet, and they control it, they control the gas, they control whether there is no gas. If an asset gets stolen, they could burn it from whoever stole it. Blacklist that address, remint that NFT, if so be. And so having all those controls where it's much like a Web2 experience for the institution is really what they want at the end of the day. And also how do they get paid on their side as well? So you have the royalty side of things. In terms of Valve and Steam, right? They have this monopoly, this huge cash cow, which is their marketplace, but that hasn't changed in 15 plus years. But it's a huge cash cow, and they don't really have a need to change it. But they could actually add to that. They're seeing that they could add to that revenue. They do have artists create assets for various games, like Dota 2 for them. If they open that up to the overall ecosystem of artists that are out there for games, they can open up the amount of assets that are created, the amount of assets that are bought and sold, and it's even the stripe of gaming. Actually is, they're seeing that their business is going to get cannibalized by NFTs and marketplaces. They're actually building the decentralized version of their business to basically destroy themselves, which is super interesting, I think.
Very poetic.
Yeah.
Yep.
Took up a lot of time, sorry.
So is it a matter of time before Steam also makes more of like an Epic Games sort of move and also starts to support like these Web3 gaming platforms? Or how long do you think like they can stay as like a Web2 only sort of marketplace?
I think the one analogy that'll probably end up being true is that it'll play out a little bit similarly to messaging apps that we use and the order in which they adopted crypto. It's never going to be the biggest companies that have the most to lose, like the largest market cap publishers in the world that adopt first. In messaging apps, it started with Kik, right, with the Kin token in like 2017, and then it started to move upstream in terms of like user count with Telegram doing the Ton offering, and in Kakao, I guess Clayton for the Korean messaging app. Similarly, I think with gaming, it's going to be a rush of kind of independent new Web3 development studios that launch first, and then maybe kind of like the SME, smaller publishers that start adopting, and then it moves upstream to the biggest companies eventually, once this like new market dynamic is too big to contain.
Got it. Brian, you mentioned Oasis. Everyone here is a huge Avalanche bull, hopefully.
Two. So
Yeah, we're familiar with all the different L1s, L2s, even some of them offering like L3s, like for gaming specifically. On the topic of chain deployment strategy, from the perspective of a VC, we also have a builder up here. How important is the underlying chain or the chain deployment strategy when you're looking at these investment opportunities? Like, how clear does that strategy need to be? And like, from the VC perspective, how much does the tech matter to you guys?
I think it's not that important. So I see a lot of games now that have a blockchain strategy. So they have like the one chain they're on, and then they have like a roadmap where they go to this chain, and sometimes opportunistically, like Arbitrum is hot or whatever, they go there because they think they can grab some users. And for like the more crypto native games, that works in the short term, but I would say like we're targeting a much bigger market here, the gamers outside of crypto. And then I think you want to look at what features you need for your game, and based on that you pick a chain that suits your needs. And I would say from there on you just focus on user acquisition, getting users in your game, and they shouldn't even know what chain you're building on. Like, that's when you have a good Web3 game that abstracts away the Web3 elements, but still offers them benefits. Now, of course, there is some risk in taking one chain and sticking with it. We've seen like Luna, Solana to a degree. So I would say mitigating that sort of failure risk, because we are in a very early stage, like things could be completely different 6 months from now, is choosing an EVM chain. That's what we would advise our projects. And we are now building a subnet on Avalanche Beam, so that will be a chain tailored to games. And there we use very similar design philosophy, so it's very much tailored to games, to our partner games based on their feedback, and we abstract away as much of the Web3 stuff as possible, but we also we sort of minimize the choices for our games, because they get paralysis by analysis by all these like different chains, different infrastructure pieces that they need to choose. They get all the options, like if they want to go crazy, they want to customize, it's all possible, but they just get like the basic choices, like plug and play ready. And yeah, that's how I would look at chains.
Yeah, I think as an end user perspective, the easier is the onboarding for the game, you're going to have a mass adoption, right? So the chain is important, but I think the way you onboard users with the wallet is also super important. I mean, how many times you are going to lose Web2 guys into Web3 if you ask them to have MetaMask? Switch the network, RPC, customize it. I mean, no way, right? So you have to have a very smooth Web3 auth, you log with your Gmail, and then the guy shouldn't even see the chain behind it, right? Whether you're multi-chain or you are on some EVM chain, that doesn't matter so much. I think the smooth way to onboard users, and obviously is kind of the key element to me.
No, I agree that the chain on the underlayer is like the way to go, especially for AAA games. Like, so to me, it does matter what chain it's on. Like, if it's on Cardano, automatic pass. It's like, forget it. It's like the fact that you chose that is very questionable. And so and we have new chains coming out too. So like for me, the EVM right now for a massive AAA game, if you have millions of players, which is coming out. Like, if you guys ever meet Vlad from Gunzilla, he's around here somewhere. The last game that they made had 100 million unique players. It was one of the most massive games. It was called Warface. It wasn't really popular in the US, but an EVM chain, I don't think really can handle that throughput right now. And like, they're building this subnet on Avalanche because they tried every chain, and the only one that they could really handle, what they needed was Avalanche. But, even for the EVM right now on the subnet side, to handle the massive amount of users, they're, contemplating building, subnets under subnets under subnets to handle that throughput. Move is very interesting now, which is, a new, DSL that's coming out. You have SWI that came out, Aptos, and and then you have the movement subnet possibly coming out on Avalanche soon. So that's something that they're also looking at in terms of increasing the amount of throughput that they need. So it's really just one chain. It doesn't create this huge just web of subnets underneath.
Yeah.
So big AAA studios are thinking about that a lot. And overall, I think in terms of where we are right now, we don't really have mass adoption. We have very little users, and traditional gamers hate NFTs right now for the wrong reason. Like, they just need to be told, look, you can sell your NFTs for cash. That's it. You can't do that right now. And so, at the end of the day, I think, that's, we're going to have that discoverability factor right now, because, right now, we don't have the bull market. We don't have mass adoption. Learning curve is very high, and these AAA games, like where the blockchain is underneath, you'll then have a discoverability factor where you're like, oh wait, how much are my assets worth? And then you dive in, you degen in, branch to another, transfer your assets to like, the C chain or, what have you. And then,
one of the big points that I think is super interesting that came up is a couple of people think maybe the underlying chain doesn't matter, should not matter, as long as a lot of that is abstracted away, which I think is very fair. But at what point, when you're scaling to, let's say, millions of users or hundreds of thousands of users maybe, does the EVM start to become a bottleneck? And as a VC, at what point, when you're having conversations with founders or when you're writing that investment memo, do you think about like, well, the EVM can handle a few hundred transactions per second, or there's some interesting things coming out with Monad, for example, parallel processing, but still the EVM, there's still EVM-related issues associated with that. At what point do you start thinking about app chains? At what point as a VC, like, have you had that conversation with founders, or what feedback are you giving them when it comes to scaling to that, let's call it, mass adoption level?
Yeah, well, we obviously believe in app chains since we're building Beam in collaboration with Avalanche. I think it's clear that mainnets don't scale like L2s will run into the same problems, but at a different threshold. So I really believe in specializing to a certain need and certain group, specifically because if you have a group, and let's say you have neighbors, in our case of games, they still enjoy the benefits of sharing infrastructure, technology, liquidity, composability to a degree, and interoperability. And I don't mean like hard interoperability, taking your overpowered sword to another game, but more like soft interoperability, like aesthetics, using your NFT in another game, or having unlocks in game A and starting at a different level in game C. So there I would say like app chains, and then not an isolated app chain for one game or one project, because then you don't have all those composability benefits and liquidity benefits, but app chains tailored to a group. Then of course you could still run into scaling problems if games become very popular, which is of course what you're aiming for. It becomes a question like, how much do you have on-chain per game? I think that's always a valid question every game needs to ask himself. I think a lot of things don't have to be on-chain. But then still, let's say there is a game either by having a lot of on-chain transactions, or just being so big that even the on-chain portion is massive, then you transfer that, and you do get these webs, you transfer that to a subnet, but it's a subnet of that subnet. There's still benefits of being a subnet to a subnet versus being isolated on a blockchain. But I don't think there's any way around it. That's just like a constraint of physics almost, if you want to have a blockchain, unless you want to have a database, but then why bother with any of this?
Yeah, I agree with Tommy's point. I think the first principles, again, approach is like, the default assumption doesn't have to be that all the game logic needs to go on-chain. As a developer, you should focus on exactly what needs to be on-chain and run the rest of the computations privately. I think, obviously, like the asset transfers themselves, to the extent they have value, should be on a blockchain, but not necessarily the rest of the game logic. And app chains and subnets have a lot of interesting properties that work well for gaming. One of the things that I think is best for subnets is, one, obviously the ability to provide security, and like the token of that game itself drives more value to that ecosystem, but also just the idea that security scales proportionate to the value of those assets. So a lot of games, you may have significant transaction throughput, but each transaction isn't so valuable, so you're able to compromise more on security for speed. I just think Subnets addresses that innately, which is interesting.
I'm also very curious your guys' take on multi-chain implementation of gaming projects, the good, the bad, the ugly. Personally, I like how Shrapnel, they're building on a subnet. They want to be scalable from day one, in terms of having their own sort of execution, space for their game, but they're also doing like these NFT free mints in different chain ecosystems to acquire users. So I'm curious, like from your perspective, or some of the gaming projects that you've invested in or previously built, what are some of the shining examples or some examples that of models that you wouldn't necessarily recommend or invest in terms of a gaming project going multi-chain?
I just finished the thought that I started earlier because I spoke a little to it. Like, I don't believe in a multi-chain strategy, like in general, but I've seen games successfully use it as a user acquisition strategy, even some of our portfolio companies. Then if they do, of course, more power to them, but in the long term, I don't think you need a multi-chain strategy. Maybe you need a dual chain strategy. I think that's sort of a valid A/B test. Like, the landscape it's very unclear what will be best. For your game, it's probably not clear what will be best. You have two chains, you mitigate sort of failure risk, and you learn a lot about, okay, which chain is better. But beyond that, I wouldn't really consider any multi-chain strategy.
I agree with Tommy there. It's too complicated right now, and just focus on making your game fun. Choose the chain that makes sense for you, and maybe for like user acquisition for like right now, like maybe trying to do like a vampire attack, say on Arbitrum or something, or building also on Arbitrum to gain those users, or maybe shift to that chain because there's little users on the chain that you chose or something. But like if you abstract out the the blockchain layer, it's not going to really matter as long as you have the throughput. It's really just like it's building on Unreal versus Unity. It's like no one really, you see the little logo at the beginning when you launch the game, but like at the end of the day, it's all about if the game is fun.
Yeah, I agree. I think we were thinking also of having a dual blockchain strategy. Multi-chain is way too complicated to implement, too much constraints, and why bother, right? So there's absolutely, we think, no need for that. But.
Yeah, to everyone's point, like the more chains you work on, the more complexity you introduce as a developer. However, I also think it's cool to just at least be able to bridge to a DeFi ecosystem that's robust enough. Today that's on Ethereum, but I think other chains as well. Just because you unlock the magic of being able to borrow against your in-game assets, collateralize them, fractionalize them, and raise money against them. All of the magic of DeFi, unlocking that is just like another avenue for value for users of these games.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, actually. So sort of for the high-value NFTs, but also to a degree, if you have like these larger entities, DAO entities that sort of want to have very all-important governance on another chain, there I see like it's valid, but it's more around sort of the financial assets in the game than the actual game being on multiple chains. But that's a very valid point.
On the note of DeFi, I want to start with you, Tekin. How Web3 native should some of these gaming projects be? Like how much should you cater specifically to like Web3 natives and like DeFi integrations and ease of onboarding versus how much like should people be allowed to import their own MetaMask, or like do you need to force a custodial wallet solution onto users and let them export their assets later on? Do they need to be able to go out and sell these NFTs on a third-party marketplace? Like what's the correct balance, and how do you think of that like in the scope of like as a VC? And then Robert, I'm curious your thoughts as a builder. How much do you think they really need to be able to like integrate with just like an open DeFi environment?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I just made the point about the value that you unlock by using DeFi. This is a little bit of an inverse view, but I actually think that you should really just fundamentally focus on making as easy to use of a great game as possible. Ideally, a user has no idea that crypto is involved or it's running on a blockchain in the back end to any level. Just because the market for Web3 users is so small today, it's not like a sustainable business model to just go after this existing market. It has to grow. And I think gaming is one of those gateway drugs that's going to make crypto grow really over time. The other thing is, like, if you think of it too much Web3 natively at the offset. Like, I saw this a lot in 2017. Some of the first waves of crypto games raised money by selling their in-game assets before really understanding what the game did. And in hindsight, that's like an incredibly ineffective way to build a game, because you're suddenly pigeonholed to what the assets have to do, what the supply of them is, and the whole like success cycle of social games throughout the 2010s. I think these companies just really A/B tested and refined the economics of their in-game economies over time. And you can't do that if you've already committed to a bunch of investors that this supply is fixed and these are what these assets do. So I really think you should just focus on making a great app first and a great game, and then adopt the Web3 magic over time, if you will.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, the less you have Web3, you see Web3, the better it is for the end user. If you are talking DeFi with the guys who don't know much about crypto, you're going to lose them. So mass adoption, just forget it. Just a pure example, it was not about gaming, but it was about DeFi. A guy wanted some platform to stake and everything. He didn't know about MetaMask. Try to explain him to do LP. If you don't know MetaMask. So that's too much of a challenge, and I think you should hide this barrier and just say, just log in with your Gmail and gonna have some yield, and that's the way it should be. Otherwise, yeah, hard to onboard the guys.
Completely agree.
No, I totally agree. Just make it as easy as possible. I mean, we already know that most gamers, traditional gamers, hate crypto, and for the wrong reasons. Axie Infinity just ruined it. We're like trying to heal the wounds that Axie Infinity caused. It's just like, you shouldn't have to pay $3,000 to play a game. And that's, that ruined, the strategies for actual AAAs that wanted to come over to crypto. And so that, they're not even using the word NFT. They're saying, look, it's free to play. You don't even have to bother with the NFTs, which, is the way it should be. But, you see just all the hate on Twitter or on IGN or YouTube saying like, oh, it's an NFT, get the fuck out of here. I'm not playing that game. And so, these AAA studios that see the value in just really just being able to turn your assets into cash, and those studios don't have to worry about the AML issues, the KYC issues, and also could, add to the revenue from, royalties or, community assets created on their games, like the Roblox model. They're kind of fighting against it. And I think, to what Tekin's point with the DeFi aspect, like you're going to have that discoverability factor, which will be a bunch of new users in crypto, because you'll not have to teach them. They'll figure it out on their own. Oh, my assets are worth how much? I just earned this NFT just from finding it in this battle royale. Yeah. And it's worth $1,000. Like, let me figure out how to sell it. And then you dive into, okay, here's my account abstracted wallet on, say, Shrapnel or something, or Gunzilla. Here's how I bridge the C chain, and then this is where I go to sell my asset, and here's how I get USDC, and then bada bing, bada boom.
This to me begs a very, very interesting point, which is, we're saying focus on the game, build a great game. We're also saying crypto, selling NFTs, selling tokens is a great way to raise capital to develop a game. And we're also saying that the users should know about NFTs, they shouldn't know about tokens, and yet that's also what, in theory, is what makes this vertical so compelling to put on chain. So at what point do the users need to learn what crypto is? Because in my mind, it's very difficult to avoid teaching them what MetaMask is at a certain point. Maybe not MetaMask, but a wallet in general, right? And it's very difficult to eventually avoid trying to teach them how do you monetize these NFTs, or how do you monetize these tokens. So in that vein, if I were to sort of spin that into a question, what advice are you giving founders, or as a builder, how are you thinking about the token model through the frame of the end user, and when they eventually will be onboarded, to the actual chain to monetize their assets? How do you think about that token model?
They still you could sort of distinguish two types of users, but the larger group is the gamer users that will eventually make up the bulk of users, and then there could be sort of the crypto investors at the asset level. By definition, those will usually know already a bit more about crypto, and if they want to participate on that level, or let's say for some projects, if that's a thing at the governance level, then yes, they should self-learn quite a bit. But for the users, I still think they should know pretty much nothing about Web3 stuff. All they need to understand is concepts they already know, which is more like economic concepts, like ownership, an economy, like your coins have value, your items have value. Before, they already did that in games, and now they actually own that value, and it becomes like there will be more avenues for financialization. Just the economies around games will become more interesting, but they still don't have to know, ideally, like how they need to connect their MetaMask. They will know they have a wallet, but they already know that they have that in real life, they have that in games. So yeah, I don't think they need to know much beyond that.
Yeah, tokens in games aren't new, you know. Like, every game on mobile has like those tokens where you buy them and you can, you know, get extra perks in games and stuff like that. So like gamers are used to that. Now it's just, you know, there's that incentive to accrue those tokens instead of just paying for cash to buy, like, you know, get extra turns in a game or something like that, or buy a skin in Fortnite. You know, now there's actually like, maybe I want to stake these assets instead, or maybe I want to vote on, say, the next skin, the Drake skin that comes out on this game or something like that. So there's a, you could talk for hours about the token models on crypto games and as a whole. So, and we have a minute and a half left. So.
Yeah. With a minute and a half left, I want to go down the line. What trend, what flavor of the month are you seeing in GameFi investments on the infra side or the gaming project side? Like, what are you seeing more of right now in the market? And Brian, I'll let you think. Let's start with Tekin and come down the line.
Sure. I think the most important one that I'm excited about, having looked at crypto games since like 2017, is just the quality of teams that are entering the space are significantly higher. Most of the innovation and progress in crypto history has been done more on the infrastructure side than on the app side. So the space is still predominantly filled with like low-level engineers than it is like product people or UX people. But I do believe that after 2021 and really crypto going mainstream in terms of the ability to like raise meaningful institutional capital and form great companies in a short period of time, I think that we're getting great like AAA studio quality teams build Web3 native games. So I just think as these projects launch, they're going to be so high caliber relative to what we've seen so far in the space.
Yeah, as a builder, I can say that VCs are looking at the teams, but they are asking for MVPs, right? In 2017, with a PDF, you would raise $10 million. Well done. Now it's completely a different story. There is a market, there is a FTX story, and now it's a different level of, you know, having high standards to get VC on board.
Yeah, no, it's a completely different market. It's a much more healthy market. Like, you better come prepared with your MVP, but also with a reasonable valuation. Like, I think current valuation is probably down 60-70% from where they were 1.5 years ago, but this is actually more in line with reality. It said much more about how crazy that market was.
Yeah, I'm super stoked for actual AAA titles like coming on, and you know, there's movie directors creating games now, new battle royales where it's just, you know, it's built on an Avalanche subnet, and you know that you don't even know the blockchain's there. It's going to actually onboard millions of users into crypto. You know, we have a couple games that are launching this year. You have the founders of EVE Online, which is a massive, you know, game.
That was a
from,
huge
like,
raise recently.
20 years plus game, like one of the biggest economies on the internet, all Web2 based, and they're basically, you know, I don't know if it's the exact game, but they're basically.
It's a separate game.
Yeah, but they're, you know, it's similar in space and aspect, but it's basically, you imagine that on Web3 and just the massive economy that could grow there because just they know how to do it. It's very exciting, and you know, it's all happening now, finally, and I think that's going to be a new wave in crypto while we wait for the next Bitcoin halving, which hopefully should be the next bull market.
Please help me thank our amazing 4 panelists for sharing so much alpha.